The boogeyman's reclusive hideaway. In the darkest depths of the forest, miles from civilization's judging eyes, a lone cabin stood. Within its weathered walls, a man existed, the boogeyman, as he was once known, now nothing more than a shadow of his former self. A creature of nightmares, his name invoked a bone-chilling terror in the hearts of all who heard it. But those days were long past, and the boogeyman had retreated to this secluded abode, seeking a chance at a new life, a chance at peace. His only companion was his loyal dog, an old, grizzled creature who had seen the worst humanity had to offer and still chose to love unconditionally. Together, they had settled into a quiet routine, the boogeyman's days filled with the simple tasks of maintaining their hideaway, his nights spent in quiet contemplation, staring into the flickering flames of the fireplace. It was a far cry from the life he had once led, a life steeped in blood and darkness. The boogeyman had been a legend in the underworld, an assassin without equal, his name whispered in hushed tones by those who feared and respected him in equal measure. But that life had taken its toll, each kill chipping away at his soul until he barely recognized himself. And so, he had walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving behind a legacy of terror and a trail of bodies in his wake. But even in this remote wilderness, the boogeyman couldn't escape the demons of his past. They haunted his dreams, the faces of those he had killed, their screams echoing in his mind. He knew he could never truly atone for his sins, but he hoped that in this new life, he could find some measure of redemption. His dog was his anchor, a reminder of the goodness that still existed in the world. The bond they shared was unbreakable, forged in the fires of shared hardship and tempered by an understanding that transcended words. In the dog's eyes, the boogeyman saw a reflection of himself, a creature scarred by a cruel world but still capable of love and loyalty. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the boogeyman began to believe that perhaps he had finally found the peace he sought. The nightmares came less frequently, and the weight of his past seemed to lift, if only a little. He began to allow himself to hope, to dream of a future free from the shadows of his former life. But on a cold, moonless night, the boogeyman's fragile peace was shattered by a sound that chilled him to his core. It was a sound he had heard countless times before, the sound of a predator on the hunt. But this was no earthly predator. The sound was otherworldly, a high-pitched whine that set his teeth on edge and made his dog whimper in fear. The boogeyman knew then that his past had caught up with him, that the sins he had tried to bury had risen from the grave to drag him back into the darkness. He reached for his weapons, the tools of his trade that he had hoped to never use again. But before he could act, the cabin was engulfed in a blinding light, and the boogeyman found himself face to face with a nightmare made flesh. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen, a twisted amalgamation of flesh and metal, its eyes burning with an otherworldly intelligence. It stood over the lifeless body of his dog, the loyal companion who had been his only friend in this lonely exile. The boogeyman felt a rage building within him, a fury that threatened to consume him entirely. He lunged at the creature, his weapons forgotten, his only thought to tear it limb from limb with his bare hands. But the creature was too strong, too fast. It batted him aside like a ragdoll, sending him crashing through the wall of the cabin and out into the cold night air. As he lay there, broken and bleeding, the boogeyman saw the creature disappear into the night, taking with it the only thing he had left in the world. And in that moment, he made a decision. He would hunt down this creature, this alien invader, and make it pay for what it had done. He would have his vengeance, even if it meant descending back into the darkness he had tried so hard to escape. With a groan of pain and determination, the boogeyman pulled himself to his feet and limped back into the cabin. He gathered his weapons and his gear, the tools of his trade that he had hoped to leave behind forever. He took one last look around the place that had been his sanctuary, the place where he had dared to hope for a better life. Then, with a heavy heart and a burning desire for revenge, the boogeyman set out into the night, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The alien invaders. The alien creatures moved through the dense forest with a predatory grace, their movements fluid and precise. They were a warrior race, bred for combat and conquest, their bodies honed to perfection through generations of genetic manipulation. They had come to this primitive planet in search of resources, in search of a new world to conquer and bend to their will. Leading the pack was the alien prince, a towering figure clad in armor that shimmered like liquid metal. His eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, and his every movement radiated power and authority. He had been chosen to lead this mission, to bring glory to his people and to prove his worth as a leader. The prince surveyed the landscape before him, his enhanced senses picking up every sound and scent. He could feel the fear emanating from the primitive creatures that called this world home, and it filled him with a dark satisfaction. They were weak, these humans, no match for the might of his people. But as he led his warriors deeper into the forest, the prince began to feel a sense of unease. There was something out there, something that didn't belong. It was a presence that set his instincts on edge, a feeling of being watched by something ancient and powerful. He dismissed the feeling as mere superstition, a primitive response to an unfamiliar environment. But as they continued their march, the feeling only grew stronger. And then, without warning, all hell broke loose. It happened in an instant. One moment, his warriors were moving through the undergrowth with their usual efficiency. The next, they were under attack, a flurry of movement and violence that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The prince watched in disbelief as his warriors fell, their bodies torn apart by a force that moved too fast to be seen. He heard their screams, saw the fear in their eyes as they realized that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered before. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the attack was over. The prince found himself alone, surrounded by the broken bodies of his warriors. He reached for his weapon, ready to face whatever had dared to challenge him. But when the attacker finally revealed itself, the prince felt a chill run down his spine. It was a human, or at least, it had once been human. But there was something different about this one, something that set it apart from the weak and frightened creatures he had encountered before. The human moved with a fluid grace that belied its primitive origins, its movements precise and deadly. It was clad in a suit of armor that seemed to be cobbled together from bits and pieces of alien technology, a patchwork of scavenged parts that somehow worked in perfect harmony. But it was the human's eyes that truly unnerved the prince. They burned with a fire that he had never seen before, a rage that seemed to consume the very air around it. This was no mere human, he realized. This was something else entirely. The prince raised his weapon, ready to strike, but the human was too fast. It dodged his blows with ease, moving with a speed and agility that defied belief. And then, before the prince could react, the human was upon him, its hands wrapped around his throat, squeezing the life from his body. As he struggled for breath, the prince looked into the human's eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. He saw a hatred there, a fury that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. And in that moment, he realized that he had made a terrible mistake. He had underestimated the humans, had dismissed them as weak and primitive. But this one, this boogeyman, was something else entirely. It was a force of nature, a being consumed by a need for vengeance that would stop at nothing until it had what it wanted. With his last breath, the prince whispered a warning to his people, a final message that he hoped would reach them before it was too late. But as the darkness closed in around him, he knew that it was already too late. The boogeyman was coming, and nothing in the universe could stop it. The boogeyman's vengeance. The boogeyman stood over the broken body of the alien prince, his chest heaving with exertion and rage. He had done it. He had struck the first blow against the creatures that had taken everything from him. But he knew that this was only the beginning. He looked down at the patchwork armor that covered his body, a testament to his ingenuity and determination. He had scavenged it from the remains of the alien technology he had encountered, reverse engineering it to suit his needs. It had been a painstaking process, one that had pushed his intellect and his sanity to the brink. But it had been worth it. Now, armed with the weapons of his enemy, the boogeyman set out to finish what he had started. He would hunt down every last one of these alien invaders and make them pay for what they had done. He would have his revenge, no matter the cost. As he moved through the forest, the boogeyman's mind raced with possibilities. He knew that the aliens would be on high alert now, their forces mobilized to hunt him down. But he also knew that he had an advantage. He knew this land, knew every nook and cranny of the forest that had been his home for so long. And he had the element of surprise on his side. He began to plan his next move, his tactical mind working overtime to find the most efficient way to strike at the heart of the alien forces. He knew that he couldn't take them all on at once, but he could chip away at their defenses, weaken them bit by bit until they were vulnerable. And so, he set to work. He laid traps and ambushes, using the environment to his advantage. He struck from the shadows, his movements quick and deadly, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake. He became a ghost, a phantom that haunted the nightmares of the alien soldiers. But as he fought, the boogeyman began to realize that there was more to this war than just vengeance. He saw the fear in the eyes of the aliens he faced, saw the way they clung to their weapons like lifelines. And he began to understand that they were not so different from him. They were soldiers, just like he had once been. They had been bred for war, had known nothing but combat and conquest their entire lives. And in that moment, the boogeyman felt a flicker of something he had never expected to feel for his enemy, pity. But he quickly pushed that feeling aside. He couldn't afford to feel sympathy for these creatures, not after what they had done. They had taken his only friend, had shattered the fragile peace he had worked so hard to build. And for that, they would pay. As the days turned into weeks, the boogeyman's campaign of terror began to take its toll on the alien forces. They were spread thin, their resources stretched to the breaking point as they tried to hunt him down. And with each victory, the boogeyman grew more powerful, more determined to see his mission through to the end. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stood before the gates of the alien stronghold, the last bastion of their power on this world. He knew that this would be his greatest challenge yet, that the aliens would throw everything they had at him in a desperate attempt to stop him. But the boogeyman was ready. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, had honed his skills and his mind to a razor's edge. And as he stepped forward, his weapons at the ready, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. This was his destiny, his purpose. He had been born for this moment, had been forged in the fires of pain and loss and despair. And now, as he faced the final battle, he knew that he would not falter. He would fight until his last breath, would pour every ounce of his strength and his fury into this final confrontation. And when the dust settled, when the last of the aliens lay broken at his feet, he would finally have the vengeance he had sought for so long. The boogeyman smiled then, a grim, humorless smile that held no warmth or joy. He had become the monster he had always feared, had embraced the darkness that had always lurked within him. But he knew that there was no other way, that this was the only path left to him. And so, with a final, silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, the boogeyman stepped forward into the breach, ready to face his destiny head-on. The final showdown. The boogeyman stood at the entrance of the alien stronghold, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. He had fought his way through hordes of alien soldiers to get here, had left a trail of destruction in his wake that would be remembered for generations to come. But now, as he faced the final obstacle in his path, he felt a flicker of doubt. The stronghold was a massive structure, a towering edifice of alien metal and technology that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. It was heavily guarded, bristling with weapons and defenses that would have made any sane man turn and run. But the boogeyman was not a sane man. He was a man with nothing left to lose, a man consumed by a need for vengeance that had driven him to the very brink of madness. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He knew that the odds were stacked against him, that he was facing an enemy with technology and resources far beyond anything he had ever encountered before. But he also knew that he had something that the aliens could never understand, the human spirit. He had seen it in the eyes of the people he had met on his journey, the survivors who had lost everything but still clung to hope. He had seen it in the way they fought, the way they refused to give up even in the face of overwhelming odds. And he knew that it was this spirit, this unbreakable will, that would be his greatest weapon in the battles to come. With a final, silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, the boogeyman stepped forward into the stronghold. He was immediately met with a barrage of weapons fire, a storm of lasers and plasma that would have torn any ordinary man to shreds. But the boogeyman was no ordinary man. He dodged and weaved, his movements a blur of speed and precision, as he returned fire with his own scavenged weapons. He fought his way deeper into the stronghold, his mind racing as he tried to remember the layout he had memorized from the stolen schematics. He knew that the alien leader would be at the center of the structure, guarded by the most elite soldiers in the alien army. And he knew that he would have to fight his way through every last one of them to get to his target. But the boogeyman was not afraid. He had faced worse odds before, had stared death in the face and laughed. And he knew that he had something that the aliens could never take away from him, his humanity. It was this humanity that drove him forward, that gave him the strength to keep fighting even as his body screamed in agony. It was this humanity that allowed him to see the fear in the eyes of the alien soldiers he faced, to understand that they were not so different from him after all. And it was this humanity that finally brought him face to face with the alien leader, a towering figure of otherworldly beauty and terror. The leader looked down at the boogeyman with a mixture of amusement and disdain, as if he were nothing more than an insect to be crushed underfoot. But the boogeyman was not afraid. He had come too far, had sacrificed too much, to be stopped now. And as he raised his weapon to strike the final blow, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was his destiny, his purpose. He had been born for this moment, had been forged in the fires of pain and loss and despair. And now, as he faced the final battle, he knew that he would not falter. The alien leader fell before him, his body broken and lifeless. And as the boogeyman stood over his fallen foe, he felt a sense of triumph that he had never known before. He had done it. He had avenged his fallen friend, had struck a blow against the alien invaders that would be felt across the galaxy. But even as he savored his victory, the boogeyman knew that his journey was not over. He knew that there would be other battles to fight, other enemies to face. And he knew that he would be ready for them, no matter what the cost. For he was the boogeyman, the monster that haunted the nightmares of the alien invaders. And he would not rest until every last one of them had been brought to justice, until the universe was safe from their tyranny once and for all. Epilogue, a new purpose. The boogeyman stood atop a hill overlooking the smoldering ruins of the alien stronghold, his armor battered and scorched, his body aching with 1,000 wounds. But even through the pain, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction. He had done what he set out to do. He had avenged his fallen companion and struck a blow against the alien invaders that would be felt across the galaxy. But as he gazed out over the destruction he had wrought, the boogeyman couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. His purpose, the driving force that had sustained him through all the trials and tribulations, was gone. What was left for him now? He thought back to the people he had met on his journey, the survivors who had lost everything but still clung to hope. He remembered the fear in their eyes, the desperation in their voices as they pleaded for help. And he realized that his work was not yet done. The boogeyman knew that the galaxy was still in danger, that there were other threats out there waiting to be faced. He had seen firsthand the devastation that the alien invaders could wreak, and he knew that he could not stand idly by while innocent lives were lost. And so, with a heavy heart and a newfound sense of purpose, the boogeyman set out once more. He would become a guardian, a protector of the weak and the vulnerable. He would use his skills and his knowledge to help those in need, to give them hope in their darkest hour. He traveled from planet to planet, seeking out those who had been touched by the alien invasion. He offered them his aid, his protection, and his guidance. He taught them how to fight, how to survive in a galaxy that seemed determined to destroy them. And as he watched them grow stronger, watched them learn to stand on their own 2 feet, the boogeyman felt a sense of pride that he had never known before. He had found a new calling, a new reason to keep fighting. Years passed, and the legend of the boogeyman grew. He became a symbol of hope and resistance, a beacon of light in a galaxy consumed by darkness. And though he never forgot the pain of his past, he found a measure of peace in the knowledge that he was making a difference. But the boogeyman knew that his work was far from over. He knew that there would always be those who sought to prey on the weak, who saw the galaxy as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. And he knew that he would be there to stop them, no matter the cost. For he was the boogeyman, the monster who had become a hero. And he would not rest until the galaxy was safe, until every last innocent soul could live in peace and without fear. As he looked up at the stars, the boogeyman felt a sense of purpose that he had never known before. He had been given a second chance, a chance to make things right. And he would not waste it. With a final, silent promise to his fallen friend, the boogeyman set out into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For he knew that as long as he had breath in his body and fire in his heart, he would never stop fighting for what was right. And so, the legend of the boogeyman lived on, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of a man who had lost everything but had found a new reason to live. And though the galaxy would never be the same, it would always remember the monster who had become its greatest hero.